Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to ICCE Connect on behalf of the International Council for Coaching Excellence. We hope you're all safe and healthy in these difficult times. My name is Sergio Lara, and I am the Manager for Strategy and Development at the ICCE and a reader in sports coaching at Leeds Beckett University in the UK. I'm delighted to be your host today for a fantastic ICCE Connect webinar. Staying connected with our community and the things we love is extremely important at these times. So let's make the most of it. The topic of today's webinar is leadership and decision-making in high-performance sport. And we couldn't have asked for a better guest than John Atkinson, high-performance director and national coach for Swimming Canada. Before I introduce John, though, please let me run you through some housekeeping rules and webinar structure. So in terms of the rules for the webinar, please keep your camera and microphone off during the duration of the webinar. So that allows us to focus on the speaker. Please submit questions using the chat either on Zoom or on the YouTube channel. But also please be respectful to all. We don't have to agree on everything, and I'm very keen to see your opinions. But please let's do this in a respectful way so we can all share and learn in a great environment. And by all means, please comment on social media using the hashtag ICCE Connect, high performance and leadership. Okay, so in terms of how the webinar is going to run, first I'm going to have the pleasure of interviewing John for 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open for questions from the audience. Now to our guest. I've had the pleasure of listening to John Atkinson twice already, and I have to say those opportunities were some of the most rewarding of my life as a learner. John has been the leader of multiple medal-winning teams in Olympic and Paralympic swimming. He has worked in the UK, in Australia, and is now high-performance director and national coach for Swimming Canada. Please give John Atkinson a cyber round of applause, okay? Good morning, John, and thanks a million for once again answering the ICCE's call. How are you?
Good morning. Yep, no, all good here. Thanks, Sergio. Thanks to John Bales for the invitation to come to this webinar. Also to Karen for the work that she's doing to help navigate us along this morning. So good, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for joining us at a time which I'm sure is very, very busy for you. And we will talk about that. But before we start talking about leadership and decision making, I wondered if you could indulge me a little bit. And if you imagine that we bumped in a lift, in an elevator, and you had a couple of minutes with me because it's a really tall building, could you give me a bit of your story of how you got to where you are? What's your journey really?
So I was a competitive swimmer. I probably swam to national level twice. But I was involved in a club at the time that in a place called Wigan in Lancashire in England that had 6 swimmers on the Olympic team in 1984. So I kind of came through as a swimmer and probably got to that point in my career where the amount of hours that I was putting into it for the rewards that I was getting didn't make it something I wanted to continue to do. So I started to teach swimming, and I taught swimming first for a local authority. And then after about a year of doing that, I was fortunate to get a position as the assistant swimming coach at Millfield School in Somerset. I then went to different club programs, had a period of time coaching in Jersey in the Channel Islands for a club swimming program. And then decided when I met my wife that we'd get married in Vegas and go back to Australia. So I again worked in swim schools, taught swimming again, became a coach with a club program, then progressed to be state coaching director. And when one of my mentors, Bill Sweetnam, moved to Britain as the performance director for British swimming, I moved to be the then world-class potential and start director, which is a bit of a mouthful and a long title. People used to ask me, does that mean you have potential to be a director one day? So we changed that to national youth coach. And then I worked through the Olympic program in British swimming for about 9 years. And my last 2 years in the UK, I headed the Paralympic swimming program into London, into the home games. And then the opportunity to come to Canada came around, and I moved over here in early 2013. So teaching swimming, coaching age groupers, coaching high performance, 3 different countries, Paralympic and Olympic. I hope there's some sort of experience in there that can help in our discussion on leadership and decision making today.
Thank you, and that's a great summary, really. And I'm always very keen to understand the journey of the coach, and because we all have different journeys, and it kind of shows that there's some elements of commonality, okay, but there's also some really idiosyncratic ways of getting to where we end up, and all those moments really add up, really, including your wedding in Vegas, which I didn't know anything about. But we want to see the pictures as soon as possible, please.
One day,
but in
perhaps.
Your Elvis costume.
No, Elvis was singing, so we weren't in the costume.
Fantastic. All right, so let's talk about now a little bit about the job of the high performance director and national team coach. What does your day-to-day look like? I mean, it sounds like a really big job. So talk me through some of those day-to-day chores, or what is it that you do?
So I would say, what's the typical day? And I think the typical day is that there is nothing typical about any day. And that is the thing that kind of comes through, whether I'm traveling and having a discussion with an athlete and a parent and a coach, or whether I'm working on a national task force to try and get sports going again in Canada with government officials. The key common element that runs through that is that time is something we have to try and get ahead of. We have to continue to make decisions. So the typical nature of the day that I would say is continually making decisions and closing loops and concluding things. So if you all can think of that, and I remember actually back when I was working with British Swimming, and UK Sport used to have a November conference. And there was one particular year in St Andrews, and it was blowing a gale. It was before the London Games, and when you walked in and you registered for the conference, you were asked, what decisions have you made today? And that has kind of stuck with me from that point, that if you become into a point where you just can't make decisions, or you stop making decisions, things grind to a halt, whether that be in the coaching side of my position, or whether that be in the high performance director side. So decision making is what makes the role the same every day, I would say.
So, I mean, that's really interesting. The idea of the most typical thing about your job is that there isn't a typical day, that every day is different. How does that affect? I know you mentioned that you have to get, so can you talk me through your planning process a little bit? How do you get ahead of time?
So there's kind of obviously different elements to that. There's working with our high performance coaches who are based in our centres. There's working with the coaches in universities and club programs. So we have athletes in the swimming program that are completely spread across a very large country and in different countries. So we have to work with coaches to seek opinion, and listen is very important to what they're telling you. Listen to the athletes is very important. But I think it comes back down to that one person who is in a privileged position to seek all the information that you can get before you make those decisions. And that goes into the planning. And I think that, again, if I kind of think back to some influences that made me think of things, I was once fortunate to listen to Dr. Steve Peters, deliver a session to British Taekwondo in Manchester, actually at the velodrome. And they talked a lot there about how in the cycling program, they didn't actually insist, my wording might be wrong, of everybody had to do everything, but everybody did. And that was another point in my career that made me think that if I can get whatever program I'm running, and right now it's the swimming program in Canada, if I can get everybody wanting to be at everything that we do, I don't need rules to actually need everybody to get everybody there. And I think that's a really important point of how we plan now. We include people in the planning. Doesn't mean to say everything that they want will be done. But then when there is a plan that's put together, we get really good buy-in from athletes, coaches, support staff, funding agencies, and our own board. So my role is to try and get everybody involved in the plans so that when we deliver them, everybody has been part of getting there, even if it's not necessarily what they want.
That's an interesting one then, because you're saying that the confluence of leadership and decision making is inseparable, really. A leader is constantly making decisions.
Correct. And
I also, go on.
Within our high performance program at the moment, we have our group calls. So whether that be Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it might be, where in our high performance leadership group, which is about 10 people, so it sounds quite big, but any discussion goes to get to the best solution. And I think that as a leader, it doesn't matter who has that opinion or that idea that is the best decision. We have a good discussion about it, and then we get to implementing it. So everybody's bought in to the decision of the planning. This, something as simple as, where do we have our trials for the Olympic Games in 2021? How do we get to changing it, and where do we put it? Because we've all spent 5 or 6 years putting plans together for a 2020 Games that were all taken away, and now we have to put plans back in place in a few months, what would normally take years. And we've involved everybody in that, and then we've already been able to put out a plan that's subject to change with all the dates in it, as one example, I guess.
And that's a task and a half, really. But going back to this idea of the confluence between leadership and decision making, I've been doing quite a lot of reading on leadership lately, and actually I haven't come across a definition of leadership that was focused on decision making. But really listening to you, it seems like in one sentence you could just say, well, leaders make decisions, okay? Because at the end of the day, everyone can have an opinion, but then you have to make the decision.
Correct.
And then I'm keen for you to explore, because I've heard you say this before in one of your previous conferences, really, that you have to make decisions even if they are not popular. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. And, I again, based on things that have happened to me previously, I also kind of extend on that there's only one thing worse than a poor decision, and that's no decision.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes when we're in uncharted waters, we are dealing with things that we've never had to deal with before. We have no blueprint for how to navigate around a certain situation. And therefore, I think when you're in that role, explaining to people that you're working with the coaches, with the athletes, the support staff, the board, funding agencies, with everybody, that you are going to continue to move forward with the intent to always improve. They will be part of that process, and having an understanding that, it's not the fact that things go wrong, it's how you then deal with it when it has gone wrong that shows the strength of any team and program. And I think I've said before that, when we go away with a team of 32 athletes and we have 18 support staff, so we have 50 people, something's going to happen. and something will happen that hasn't happened before, but it's how you then deal with it. And when they see you dealing with those things in a rational way, there becomes this growth of trust in you as a leader, that you listen, that you can take opinions, but you don't delay the decision in order to get to it. No, more often than not, you want to make sure that you make the right decision. But again, it doesn't always happen, but you've got to try and get to the right decision by listening and consulting before you make that decision. Now that's with the program.
So from your point of view, really.
Sorry, Sergio.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, getting as much information as you can before making a decision is really important to you. And am I right thinking that it serves two purposes? On the one hand, it really gives you the information that you need, but also on the other hand, is sort of preparing people to understand your decision, that they can then understand why you've made a decision?
Yeah, I think that's really important to it. And there's a swimming coach in Scotland. It's called Patrick Miley. And Patrick works now at the University of Aberdeen. And his daughter, Hannah, swam on the national team in Britain for a number of years, and he always coached her. But Patrick is a helicopter pilot, and he flies to North Sea oil rigs. And I remember when Chelsea War worked with British Swimming for a period, we were offered to go and meet Patrick, who would fly us to the oil rig. And between the turnaround of the flight, we would have a discussion about talent development and then fly back. I turned the opportunity down because I wasn't keen on flying in the North Sea to an oil rig on a small helicopter. But the point is, he used to do training for helicopter pilots, and it was called crew resource management. And a lot of people in aviation will have to do this training, and it's all about communication. So along with Patrick, first with British Swimming, then with British Para Swimming, and since I've been in Canada, he's done an adaptive version of this for coaches. We call it coach resource management. And within it, we talk of different ways of communication. And he, being ex-military, refers a lot of the personality types and communication styles. There's the tank, for example, that is at you in this communication. He talks of the sniper, who might not say it to you, but might say it to somebody else. So he talks a lot about communication styles and how you as a leader communicate with different people. And being open and honest is one of those styles that he talks about. And I have used a lot of what I've got from Patrick that came from crew resource management from aviation into coaching about communication, and trying my very, very best, and I don't always succeed, not to take things personally. And if somebody disagrees with a decision that we are going to make for planning or relay team selection or whatever it is, you almost have to try to get to this mindset to say, it's actually okay that we disagree. And it's actually okay that you have your opinion and I have my opinion. And I'm actually okay with that. And this is the direction that we're going in. And I think if you can get into that mindset, conflict doesn't happen as much. Disagreement may happen, but conflict doesn't happen. And then we move on with the decision that's been made, and so on and so forth, that you continue to make your decisions, continue to plan. I don't know if that resonates out there with coaches, but I consider disagreement very different than conflict. And it's the conflict we're trying to avoid. And disagreements and criticism can actually be a gift. Depends, sometimes it's wrapped in barbed wire, but it can still be a gift if you want to use it and be better.
Yeah. But it resonates really a lot with something you've mentioned in the past around the idea of no drama, which I know you borrowed from Barack Obama. Okay. But
yep.
Really, the idea that the environment is already dramatic enough, okay, to add further drama to it.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, it's like, you know, kind of one of the things about leadership is that we all learn from what we hear and witness and experience. And part of being a leader is then being able to take something and develop it further. So one of the examples I give on that is the focus energy matrix, which was once published by the Harvard Business School.
Yeah.
And within that, they talk about the 4 boxes and purposeful being the place that you all want to be in one of those boxes. And that's only 10% of managers that are purposeful. And the rest live in procrastination, disengagement, and distraction. And so when you look at that and you think, right, well, how am I going to use this? My spin on that and trying to take it further is to say, I choose to be in all 4 boxes at certain times. And if only 10% of managers are purposeful, that means in the other 90% are in those other boxes, but I choose sometimes to disengage, because the time and effort to do that, the negativity that's involved, means I'm not being purposeful. So I choose to disengage today on that specific issue, but it's still a decision to disengage rather than you just becoming disengaged. The one box I don't really want to live in is distraction. And distraction is the thing that we all have to try and avoid at all costs, because if we become distracted from the focus that we're trying to achieve, then we're not in a good place. Procrastination is, I would spin that a different way. Some people might procrastinate not to get to a decision or to wait for other people to make it and they follow. Sometimes if I want to buy a little time before I get to that decision, it may seem like, okay, I'm procrastinating today, but I call it the delay to gather the information that we've already talked about before we get to making a decision. So that's kind of another one. It's we all learn from whoever we listen to, from sessions such as this, from the questions that I might get, even if they're wrapped in barbed wire, I will still take them and learn from it, because I don't for a minute ever think that I'm getting everything right, but my intent is always to get it right.
I mean, one thing that comes across really strongly from listening to you is a really high level of self-awareness. So is that something that you've purposefully work at, or how is that level of self-awareness of who you are, what you like, you know, being able to choose who you want to be or which box you want to be in a particular day? How does that come about?
A lot of trial and error. And actually, the more that you're aware of how you act, the more you can try to have an impact on the decisions that you make and how you deliver them. And I don't think that for a minute I've always got it right. You know, I think the old John from 20 years ago, the red mist might have descended a little bit faster than what it does now. And I have to try and, for the want of a better expression, keep my chimp behavior at bay in order to do the right things. There's a question just come in here from Luke Smith, which just interests me. How do you respond to unresolved disagreements that doesn't escalate to conflict, but has residual effects on the coach relationships, or even the coach-athlete relationships? And I would say to that, there are people that I've met everywhere that I wouldn't go for a coffee with. There are certainly people I wouldn't go for a alcoholic beverage with either. But there are people I need to have a conversation with. And I think that you have different phases in your coaching life. So I think the first phase is when you're a younger coach, that you might only have one way to deal with any given situation. So basically you have a 50-50 chance as to whether you pick the right way to deal with that situation. Second phase is you might have 5 or 6 ways to deal with a situation, so you have an enhanced chance of picking the right way to deal with it. There are times in your coaching where you see the issue coming and you head it off at the pass before it blows up. And then I think when you get into kind of the real coaching scenario, you sometimes manufacture issues to teach.
Yeah.
So I would say an unresolved disagreement might actually be that sometimes you can't resolve the opinion that you've done it the right or the wrong way, or that was the right or the wrong decision, but you have to try and get to the fact where it's accepted that that's what the situation is before you can then move on, whether that be coach, or whether that be coach athlete, whether that be coach board member, whether that be coach funding agency, whatever it might be, you're not always going to agree. But getting to the point of accepting that's where it's at and let it go, because it will do nobody any good holding on to it. I've had interventions with certain coaches since I've been in Canada where we've actually brought in a third party to help us get to that situation of resolving it. And we still didn't agree, but we resolved the issue, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
I mean, that again, that goes back to the idea of that leadership is a lot about relationships and being able to build trust relationship with people.
yeah, and that only happens in time. And you know, when you are given trust, you have to look after it and respect it. And it's much easier to lose it than it is to get it. But a continued approach and actual recognition that we're not always going to agree, but we will get to a resolution that that's what it is and move on to the next thing, is healthy to get to that point. Am I at that point with every single coach athlete that I deal with? No. And sometimes it takes another person to perhaps be identified to take on that relationship. So the way that we operate now, we have center coaches that are working with athletes on deck day to day. And we also have our national coaches that work, I would say, a way to describe it would be coaching the coaches. There are certain club coaches and university coaches that I will send certain national coach to. So I have 4 national coaches: senior team national coach, marathon swimming national coach, national development coach, and our next gen coach. And they all have slightly different skill sets. And it's recognizing if there's that one coach over there that I don't get along with, I'll send one of my national coaches because they do get along with them and they can get to that point. So again, that's all about relationships, I guess.
And interestingly, I mean, there's something that a little bit paradoxical. So on the one hand, you want to create this sense of no drama and dealing with things in a calm manner, but at the same time, you are every now and again trying to get people out of their comfort zone and manufacture these conflict situations or mini crises. Is that to see how people react to those situations, or why do you do that?
I think a way that I would say it is that when you're at the Olympic Games or the World Championships and everybody's under a degree of their own stress, you want to know how to deal with people in that environment. So when I started the potential and start programs back in Britain for swimming in 2001, I wanted athletes and coaches to learn from the training camps that we had or the mini competitions that we went to that were not the end destination that year. I wanted them to make mistakes in a supported environment that we could support and they could learn from. And then when we go to the actual competition, whatever that was in that year, whether it was a European Junior Championships or in Canada, a Pan-Pacific Junior Championships or a World Juniors, I want them to have experimented, actually made a mistake previously on a camp, so that when we get there, they've learned from it. They're not going to learn from it. I don't want them to make that mistake at the major competition or the Olympics. Same with a coach. So, you know, we learn from mistakes that we've made. Sometimes if we get everything right all the time, we don't necessarily learn. And you know, there's a whole hour discussion on just that, I think, but hopefully that kind of moves us to a situation where people can understand how you can get learning to happen, so that at the final hurdle, I know how I need to press a certain coach in a certain situation. And I can give you a couple of examples of that from the Rio Games in 2016. We had our pre-game staging camp in Toronto. So being a bit of a control freak, I could control the environment. I could control everything that we did because it was in Canada. Time zone change was basically a north-south flight with minimal time zone change. So quick acclimatization when we got to Rio. The day before all the coaches and staff came in, I met with the team head coach, because when we go away to the Olympics, I work as team director, not as national coach. So one of my coaches is appointed as the team head coach. We met the day before everybody arrived, and we went through all the issues that I'd identified as potential pressure points where somebody could snap, somebody could make a mistake, an issue could be happening on the team. And we said together, is this an issue, yes or no? One of them was we had a male athlete who was a potential to win a medal in the men's 100 freestyle. He'd been coaching outside of Canada with a coach from another national team who was also going to be at the Olympics. So when this swimmer finishes his race, rather than come to our team coach, he will go to his personal coach first, who's standing on the pool deck before he gets back to our team area. Is it an issue? Yes or no? We decided it's not an issue. And I can then interject if it gets to that point of needing an interjection. So can't remember whether, I think it might have been the first day at the games. It felt like the first day. And sitting in the stands watching the heats. So we're maybe, what was it in Rio? 1 o'clock heats. So we're maybe at 3:30 in the afternoon. And it's the relay team. And this swimmer leads off, hits the wall, rips the hat and goggles off, throws them down. I think, oh, here's the first spot fire that we have to put out. So I kind of just calmly got up out of the stands, walked back down to the warm-up, the prep area. I see the coaches are waiting for the athletes to come out. 3 members of the relay team are with the relay coach. This one particular swimmer is where we thought he would be with the team that's not our team, having a discussion with his personal coach.
Yeah.
The 3 swimmers waiting are okay, but the coach of that relay team is now irritated. And I see him start to do the march down pool deck. And somebody taps me, coach is marching. So I had to run a little bit quicker than his march to head him off at the pass, grabbed his elbow and said, it's not an issue, is it? He went, no, it's not an issue. He went back to the 3 swimmers. I went down, said, hey, swimmer, coach, we just want to do the debrief. All okay? Yeah, fine. Came back, did the debrief. Situation kind of resolved, but we pre-programmed that as a potential. And I guess that is one way to kind of demonstrate how that meeting with the coach before we went to Rio, then meeting with all the other staff and saying, This is going to come up. It's not an issue. This is how we'll deal with it. And it played out. Now, the backstory to that is our women's 4x100 freestyle relay was about to race that day as well. Who knows if the team environment and how we wanted to run things had changed at that moment. Right at that moment, if it had blown up, there'd been an argument. He would have gone to the women's team. There would have been discussion. A different vibe would have descended on the team immediately. So the decisions that are then taken to address it beforehand in the planning, to then get there, observe body language and how people react and respond, and then handle it in a way that I could go to the coach he was not in a good place when he was marching. I think even that description tells you the sort of face that he had on him as he was marching down that pool deck. For me, just to go over and calmly grab his elbow and said, "It's not an issue, is it?" And then he knew immediately, no, it's not an issue. Diffused, and then we went around our business. So hopefully that, I digressed a little bit, Sergio, but hopefully that was useful.
No, but it just keeps reinforcing really something that it sounds a lot easier than it really is, which is the emotional sophistication that we need at that level to not only deal with things as they happen, but to prepare for them. And it is something that not everybody can do, and it's something that I sense that we as coaches developing through the ranks, we don't pay enough attention to. I don't know, my view is that we seem to focus a lot more on knowing the sport, but then every time I talk to someone that is really maybe to that level as yourself, all they talk about is everything around the sport and not so much about the sport. Like the sport is taking, if you don't know the sport, you're not going to make it there, but if you want to succeed, you need the emotional sophistication, really.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the difference is that we're all well versed in technical skills, well versed in physiology, biomechanics. We have a great support team around us, but what makes that difference is people. So if you can hear an alarm going in the background, my apartment building is having a fire alarm. So I'm hoping that my wife and daughter will work out whether it's a test, whether it's real or not, but I'm just going to keep going.
Okay. If you need to run, okay? But maybe the interview was too hot for your building.
You never know. You never know. There's a question here from John Alder. Who has had the biggest influence on your approach to leadership and why? And who do you admire as a current leader in elite sport and why? And I think we've all had different people perhaps that have influenced us in different ways, whether it be positive or negative. And like I said earlier, we can learn from any situation that we find ourselves in. I guess being a Manchester United supporter, you kind of look at the abilities of Alex Ferguson and his man management. And I think, if you had an honest conversation with him, he'd probably reflect on certain things that he did differently in his early days of coaching to what he did later in his career. But I kind of often wonder how coaches such as him would manage an Eric Cantona, and to be able to have a relationship with somebody like that and keep them performing at the highest level. Likewise, in swimming coaching, there's a coach at the University of Florida called Greg Troy, who has worked with athletes such as Ryan Lochte, who, if there wasn't Michael Phelps, would be considered probably almost in the same breath with the number of medals and titles that he's won. And again, a coach who can get you to buy in and has a similar reputation to that of Alex Ferguson. Not from a sporting perspective, but from a business world and the way that I work, where I'm always traveling. One of the things I don't like are out of office responses. because if I had to have an out of office response, it would probably be on for 360 days a year. And in today's world of communication and technology, you don't necessarily need an office. Look at the current COVID-19 situation, how many of us are finding a way outside of the office. But I once saw a documentary on Richard Branson and how did Richard Branson work. And Richard found a way with a small group that traveled with him to keep making decisions and keep the business moving while not always being based in the same office from day to day. So they're kind of three people. And I suppose when I worked with Bill Sweetenham, who implemented massive change within British swimming between 2000 and 2007, he'd be another one that I would add to that list of people.
And interestingly, I mean, you touched there on something that I was going to ask you about later, the idea of high performance sport is not a 9-to-5 job. How is there such a thing as a work-life balance when you work in high performance sport? Do we need it? What's your take on that?
Well, I guess somewhere in the world it's 9 till 5 at any point. So I guess some people would consider that I'm not the best to advise people on work-life balance. But what I would say is, as a leader within sport, you all have to find your own way for what will work for you. And for some people, it might be as simple as not having a message bank on their cell phone, so that when you turn the phone on in the morning, you don't have 8 messages. So I remember a job that I started in, I got given a new cell phone a number of years ago. It had a message bank. And then I had a day of meetings. And after the end of the day of meetings, I had 4 messages to get back to. I managed to get back to 1. So I started day 2 in the job with 3 messages that I needed to respond to. By the end of day 2 and another 10 messages, I now had 13 messages to get back to. So I went to our IT department. I know it's a mobile phone, and back then it wasn't too technical, but I needed support with it, that I would turn off the message bank and people would find a way to communicate with me. That was one way I could do it. And there are also other times where I want to try and find thinking time. And that's important for me, that at that point I block time out to think. For me, that's how I cope with it. There isn't much balance how some people would look at it. For me, that enables me to get to the balance.
So it is really about, you said, what works for you. Okay,
Yeah.
You can't really look at other people and compare yourself.
Correct.
And there's a question really, which I think is related to this, from our friend from Portugal, Jose Curado, about the importance of having a clear and strong philosophy that guides your operations, really.
I think it goes back to that open and honest environment. And we have different coaches to work in different ways. So again, it's allowing people to have their approach to how they coach. Coaching philosophy is not necessarily the same. Just one moment whilst I check what, can you hear the alarm?
We can, yeah.
Just give me a moment to find out what's happening here.
No problem at all. You go.
I'll be back in a moment.
No problem. First things first. We're just going to take a moment to wait for John. You might use this moment to maybe post a few more questions on the chat. I will try and get through as many as possible, including some of my own, because John is just a continuous source of inspiration. And I'm writing down pages and pages of notes as we go through it.
Sergio, I'll go one more or two more questions. I think I'm going to have to leave the building, unfortunately.
Listen, I mean, I'm wait. Okay, are you sure? You sure you don't want to go straight away?
Well, I'm on the 15th floor. Oh, it stopped. There may be an announcement. Apologies, everybody, but this is how we can make things work.
I love the way you are managing this with no drama whatsoever. I think I'm more worried about you than you are.
My legs are working hard under the table. We'll carry on. My wife will let me know.
So one question really, and it kind of summarizes a little bit of the things that we've talked about really, but I've heard you say before that when you're making decisions, you need to be very aware of your own biases and preconceptions.
Yes.
How do you do that? Where do you start?
Well, I guess we're all stronger by a diverse opinion base within our leadership group, so that we work to get to the right decision, or one that can move us forwards. So if I go back to when I was a coach in my early 20s and I was coaching in England, there was this one particular day, the training group before mine was called the club squad. It was perhaps for the athletes that were not as committed. They wanted to swim a few times a week. It was maybe their second sport. They just didn't want to give it the time that we as high performance coaches thought they needed to give it. And I pulled up at the car park this one day and I went into the corner of the pool and I opened the door, and the noise was deafening, and there was people laughing, there was people carrying on. And the coach at the end of the pool was an older gentleman, and he was wearing a Mexican sombrero. And I looked down at him and I was immediately filled with anger that this is just not serious enough. And what is he doing down there? This is not how we should be running coaching. And I started that march, the one that I've told you about our coach did in Rio. Yeah. I'm now marching down the pool deck thinking, I'm going to sort this out. And as I walked down the poolside, I looked at all the parents, and every parent was smiling. I went to the club squad rep and I said, do you have an attendance register? And I had a look at the attendance register, and everybody was attending training from that group. Then I turned the page. Every single person, this was before we did things by direct debit. People used to pay their cash or their check. Yeah. Everybody had paid their squad fees. So I have happy parents, full attendance. Everybody had paid their squad fees. By the time I reached the other end of the pool, every swimmer had a smile on their face. And I walked up to the coach, I patted him on the back and said, well done, keep up the great work, and went back to my corner of the pool to write the session up. So within that answers a little bit about coaching philosophy and coaching styles, albeit at that level. But for me, that illustrated that we need different people who can bring different things to us. That was a practical example of a coach coaching in a different way. When we have our high performance meetings, I have our IST director, Dr. Alan Wrigley. I involve others who will challenge where we are at. And for some people, we've got a return to sport group currently operating within Swimming Canada. There's about 15 people. We're looking at how we can do it in our country for each province that has different provincial health systems and different health mandates, different returns to sport process. I invited a guy from Alberta that some of you may know, Dr. Steve Norris. So Dr. Steve Norris is on that group. We've got Dr. Alan Wrigley on that group. We have our own national team physician, Dr. Keeler, and myself, and a couple of others. So we formed a small group. That's a very challenging group of men or people to have these discussions with. And they will challenge my thinking and where we are at in order to get to the best possible document, process, help for coaches, help for athletes, help for club that we can get to. So I'll be challenged by that. I'll be challenged by their thinking. Everything that I say to that group will be challenged more rigorously than you can imagine. But when we get to our finished product, it has gone through a high degree of scrutiny from very smart people.
Yeah.
And we will have a good product that goes out there. Now, I could bring a group of people that would say, yes, John, whatever you've put down there is great. It's fantastic. But that's not going to get us to where we need to be. And that makes me uncomfortable. That's absolutely fine, because I need to feel uncomfortable to get to the right decisions.
And that, so do you do the same with your, when you, the rest of your staff? Are you actively looking for diverse profiles? So there is always a certain level of disagreement. You don't want to be surrounded by yes people.
Oh, absolutely. No, we will debate it internally. We will push each other. And sometimes I will say to the three people that I've just had, and even on the national task forces, look, that's really good. And there's a great number of minds that bring a collective knowledge that is unbelievable. I just need somebody to interpret that for me. And then I will help you coordinate it, and then how we then deliver it to the coaches. So when we have the return plan done, as a current living example of what we're doing, we will have sessions with coaches and sessions with athletes and sessions with support staff, so that we then communicate it in a language that they can grab and work with. So we don't want everybody coming with the same agreement, because what John knows on his own is nowhere near as what John and a group of people know and can deliver for the sport in any area.
I mean, again, to me, this seems like you live along a continuum. Okay, you're able to move, for example, and I'm going to give you two examples from a continuum of, you mentioned it, you said that you're a control freak, okay, but at the same time, you're able to let go and let people get to work and let people come up with ideas. And also the other continuum for me is the idea of, on the one hand, you are making decisions based on a hell of a lot of information, but also at the same time, it comes to a point where you have to make some decisions based on good feeling or previous experience.
Yes.
Is that the life of the high performance coach, being able to navigate that continuum all the time, as opposed to being in a set point?
I absolutely believe so, yeah. And you have to be able to, some people call it manage up, manage down, manage across, and move from different points of that at any one day. So how I might deliver something to our board of directors might be very different to how I deliver it to a funding agency, might be very different to how I have to deliver it to an athlete or to a parent or to a coach. And I will perhaps in a day be working in all those fields. And there has to be a level of understanding as to how you deal with that and seek, if I was to be upset every time somebody said something to me that was either critical, negative, or not what I believed, I'd live a pretty disastrous existence as a performance director. So again, you've got to take the personal out of it, and it's difficult. And I managed to do that more often now, but I certainly couldn't have done that all the time 20 years ago. And so I'm now working with my staff who say that, if somebody says there's a certain situation, is it black? It's black or white? Is it yes or no? I'd probably say that it's yes and no, maybe 2% of the time. But for 98% of the time, I'm working in this gray zone to get to the best solution. So I don't have rules. I have copious amounts of guidelines. Right. So that if I do go outside of them, nobody comes and said, well, you said this was the rule and you did this. So I think the role that I have to play is enable staff to be comfortable in making a decision. If it doesn't go right, tell me how you're going to fix it. I don't really care that it's gone wrong. What's the way ahead? So I think I mentioned that if you have a team of 50 people, something's going to happen, but it's not the fact that something happens. It's how you then deal with it. And, I find with that approach, I get the good, the bad, and the indifferent. Sometimes, am I ever really, really ecstatic and happy? Am I ever really, really upset and angry? Probably. But I try to be in that middle zone. So whether it's gone really, really well or really, really bad, people will come and talk to me about what we can do next. And I think that's where I strive to be. Hopefully I'm there most of the time, but I know that I'm not always there.
But it is aiming for that middle zone seems to be that sweet spot seems to be really, really keen, really important. Your staff, the people that you work with, because you're giving them by operating in the way that you do, you are giving them a lot of responsibility, and with that responsibility comes a lot of pressure. How does everybody cope with that? Would some of them prefer that you just tell them what to do all the time, or?
Yeah, I think that's for sure where it is. I'm very much, I don't mind operating in the grey. Some people need to have a black and white, yes and no approach. Even with our team selection policies, there is, for an individual sport that's very much based on time, there is still a degree in there of ability for me to operate in a little bit of a grey zone. But as long as it's, how do they describe it? High performance directed discretion, I think, is the line, or words to that effect.
Yeah.
I don't mind living in that world of discretion to get to the right decision. So back in 2016, I used that high performance directed discretion within our Olympic team nomination criteria to add an athlete to the team who, if we'd been yes, no, black, white, wouldn't have made it. No, I don't do that very often, but it's in every nomination and selection criteria that I can do that. So with some staff, say we have a Zoom call, there's 10 of us on there, and I say we're doing that meeting twice a week, and over 8 weeks, so we've had 16 meetings. If we ran that meeting in exactly the same way, it would become pretty dull and boring, and people would tune out and switch off. So the first time we run the meeting, I go through the agenda, and then everybody chips in. Second time we run that meeting, I run through the action points. I don't go through the agenda. The third time I run that meeting, every staff member has to come on and present their bit of their action points and update us on other things. And then when we get to certain points within the meeting, I'll go back through that group. So I'll go to our development coach, any comments? Go to our senior coach, any comments? Go to our open water coach, any comments? Go to our team manager, any comments? And therefore, by doing that, we have our staff engage. They become accountable because they're now part of the decision and part of the discussion, and they know that they can go off and work. And when we run those meetings, I don't always chair them. Sometimes I'll get my team manager to chair them. I'll get somebody else to chair them. So I become almost like another member of the meeting at the same level as any staff member that's in it. And then if we need to get to a point where a decision needs to be taken because we can't get to an agreement, we'll get there. But it's all part of making everybody feel that they're part of it. They can do the job they're employed to do. If it goes wrong, come with a solution, not with a problem.
So there is you operate. You have a pyramid hierarchy, but also a flat hierarchy, and you kind of
Yes.
moving between the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
So Christopher here asked a question, have you ever had a discretionary decision backfire? And if so, how did you deal with it? Simple answer, yes. I think back to 2012 to an appeal that I dealt with before the Paralympics in Britain. And in order to get 2 extra athletes onto the team for the Paralympics in 2012, even though it was discretionary, it brought along 2 other swimmers or 3 others under that same discretion. And of course, one particular athlete felt he should have been involved. He just so happened to be a 9-time Paralympic gold medal winning athlete from previous games. So we actually ended up down in, I can't remember, I think it was behind Fleet Street where the sports court is. And we went through quite a process. And at the end of the day, I was asked to reconsider the decision of not to select this particular athlete. He wasn't selected. But 3 of the 4 that we brought on by that discretion won a medal. So it kind of backfired for a period. But at the end of the day, when 3 of the 4 we did add won medals at the Paralympics, I did still feel in the end it was vindicated that we had that ability to apply that discretion to get those 3 extra medals from our home games in London.
And interestingly, really, as democratic and calculated you want to be, there is an element of risk taking in decision making. How do you manage that? How risk averse are you, or how keen are you to go into the unknown a little bit?
I think one of the things I looked at earlier, Sergio, was about analytics or gut feel. And I think in today's world, we have to have, I'm told, now what's the wording that I'm asked for? Evidence-based.
Yeah.
Everything has to be evidence-based today. So sometimes this is the decision that I am going to make. And now with the expert minds that we have, can you find me some evidence to support that decision? So sometimes we do it that way. So I guess we've moved away a little bit from gut feel, but gut feel still comes into it. And then I ask the minds around the table, is this gut feel right? More often than not, it is. Sometimes it isn't. And sometimes I ignore that advice and put my hand on the hot plate. But I don't go back for the second round of putting my hand on the hot plate.
Yeah. So you learn from your mistakes, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Someone said to me once that the quality of a great coach was not to make the same mistake twice.
That's true. Very true.
Make the same mistake twice, then there's something that you haven't done well, really.
Yeah, 3 strikes and you're out, sort of thing.
You also, it seems like you're able to really avoid this notion of paralysis by analysis.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that dangerous?
To avoid paralysis by
analysis? To actually to overanalyze things in your environment, because you mentioned before that time is of the essence, that decisions have to be made at a pace.
Yeah, and it's like when you are on pool deck and you're coaching, or you're on the side of a field and you're coaching, or whatever it might be, wherever the people on this call are working. And if you ask too many people for their opinion on something that you have to decide, you don't get to making your decision. Yeah. So sometimes it's take the factors into consideration, but get to that point. And if it doesn't go right, then you have to put your hand up and say, you know what, it didn't go right. And this is what didn't go right. This is what we'll do to make sure that we do it right the next time. Down to as simple as within a swimming team, you have to put into the World Championships and Olympics as kind of a resolution table where you go when you're going to make an appeal for a disqualification. But before the session starts, you have to turn up with your relay sheet with the names of the athletes in the order that they're going to race that relay. And you hand it in, let's just say it's an hour and a half before the start of that session. And then that relay might be racing 3 hours, 3.5 hours after, because the relays are always at the end of the session in swimming. So we have a process and a protocol. Process and the protocol is that the head coach of the team will go and work with the relay coach and the athletes, that they will determine the order for the preliminaries for the heats. That then is signed by the relay coach. It's signed by the head coach. It comes to me. I then sign it, and along with the team manager, we go and put the relay sheet in. So we had the World Short Course 25-meter pool championships in Windsor, Ontario, in Canada, the end of 2016. This one particular day, the whole process broke down. The relay coach wasn't at the team meeting. He couldn't sign the piece of paper. So we took the piece of paper. I wrote it down on my book. Team manager wrote it down in her book. We then got to the pool and we had an issue blow up and the head coach couldn't be found. So relay coach hasn't signed it. He's gone. Head coach couldn't sign it. He's dealing with something else. I'm with the team manager. We look, we both have the same thing written down. So we transcribe from our notebooks onto the relay form. We take the relay form to the resolution table. We hand it in. Off we go. Swimmers arrive. They warm up. They come out onto pool deck. They line up behind the lane. And I'm looking at Jan, our team manager, and I'm like 300 meters away from this up at the back of the stand. And I can't repeat the exact words that I used, but it was along the lines of, they are not in the correct order. And it was like slow motion. And the first swimmer approached the block, they're on the block, and they dive in. I know from that point, the team is going to get disqualified at a home world championships. Spin forward a few minutes. The Canadian team win the gold medal.
Oh, no.
Everybody gets out and they're celebrating. I'm sitting in the stands with the team manager. And now I'm thinking, I've moved to the point in my mind that I'm now going to be in front of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, fronting a home nation that the team won, and we couldn't get them in the right order. So we deal with the athletes, the aftermath, the disqualification, and then I go and stand in front of the media in the mix zone and say, it's my fault. I take this one. As the team leader, it should have been done differently. It wasn't. Our processes failed, but it doesn't matter where they failed. At the end of the day, the responsibility is here. And it actually got spun in a very different situation. And actually the guy who conducted the interview, and he said, I'm going to ask you these questions. And I said, well, absolutely fine. And he asked them very well. No, I would do any media for him in the future. But I guess that's owning it. And you as a leader, no matter what comes up, I take responsibility. This should not have happened. It is my fault. Rather than trying to justify it in any way and then move on. And I guess that I can't even remember what I was trying to explain there, but hopefully it kind of shows as a leader, you have to own it.
Well, the idea of that you have to be, what I take from it is that you have to be as quick making decisions or acting as you are acknowledging when you've got it wrong.
Yes.
And or when something is not gone well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you still hearing me there, Sergio? Okay, so I'm still here if anybody else is there. So John, I think is.
Yeah, I'm back as well. Sorry, guys.
Okay, Sergio, I'll leave it to you.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. I was saying that I think what I took from that was the idea of that we have to be fast making decisions, but also being fast at acknowledging that we made a mistake, or that somewhere along the line the process is failed. I'm going to ask you one last question if you've got 2 minutes, John.
No problem.
Let you go so you can go and put the fire out. Okay.
Well, we've had the all clear, I think.
Oh,
So,
okay. Good. Talking to you and talking to a lot of other high performance coaches, like a really difficult trick that you have to pull all the time is the idea of being with one eye in the future and one eye in the present all the time. So planning for the future, but dealing with today. What's your take on that?
I think that that's essential, and it's a little bit like how in these roles you have to, I think you said, manage horizontally as well as vertically, and work in different scenarios. If we just focus on the here and now, we don't have any pathway or structure for the future. Same as if we only focus there, we have, we're not dealing with the here and now. And it comes back to really trying to find that balance of addressing both those areas. And it might be at some point with our high performance leadership team, we have somebody who's focusing on the future and I'm dealing with the here and now. Likewise, if I'm away and planning, setting things up down the line, I have people here who know that they can step in and make decisions if people can't get me.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important for all of us to consider. Who do we trust to bring into that very close-knit leadership team that we work with, who you will still empower to make some decisions if you're not around because you're dealing with something else.
Great. Well, John, really on that note, I'm going to let you go. Before that, I'm going to thank you so much for giving your time and your expertise. I've taken a million notes really while you were talking, and I'm sure that everybody else is the same, and we'll have lots of things to think about and to implement really in the day-to-day. Thanks to everyone really for jumping on the call. Thanks to Karen for putting it together. And I really encourage you to spread the message and share with people. The webinar will be available on YouTube as of tomorrow. John, thanks again. All the best in these difficult times with all your planning, and thank you so much again.
Okay, likewise, thank you to everybody. Thanks for the people who dialed in. I look forward to meeting you guys all again when we're out of this situation and whatever format and the new normal is when we get to it. But let's keep working towards it. So thanks very much.
Thanks a million, John, and thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay connected. Bye-bye.
Bye.